Now, of course, read the instructions very carefully. You know that they're going to try to trick you, so be prepared for that. And your best way to prepare for that is to make sure that you read it carefully. And so in this case, okay, there is no trick. For 5, 6, 7, and 8, you're going to pick one word for each of the two blanks that goes together. Now, what I find, it makes these much easier, much more intuitively solvable, and much more reliably correct, are if you fill in the second blank first, and in the case of the choices that have 3 blanks, fill in the last blank first. It will be the one that locks in the meaning. Because until you get to that point in the sentence, you could very well have 2 different choices that would make sense in the first blank. But you'll end up only having one word that can make sense in the last blank. And then if you fill in that and you read back towards the beginning, that will determine which word must go in the first blank. That sounds a little convoluted, but let's put it into practice with question 5. And it's a good idea, again, zoom in 1 click. And let's try this approach. Try reading it through and just fill in a word for one that's a place filler as you read until you get to the second blank and fill in the word there that makes the most sense. Now here, again, this is maybe a 60-40 type proposition. If you don't know the answer and there is a very unusual word and you don't have anything else to go on, then pick the unusual word. But again, that's far from being an absolute. That's far from being correct all the time. That's something that has a better than not chance of being successful. So you definitely don't want to rely on that. But it is my impression that that works. So let's tackle these. Now, unfortunately, this is all or nothing. You have to get both choices right or you don't get any points. But because one word is tied to the other, we greatly increase your chances of getting it right. So please tackle this one and then raise your hand and let me know your choices in the chat box. Thank you. Okay, so we look at these two, and let's see, again, the signal words are going to make all the difference in this. An apostle of noble, that's always, for our purposes, a positive, but already blank notions. And again, describing her respected for her integrity, energy, and her resolve, but increasingly out of step. And ultimately, okay, so finally we boil this down to whatever goes in this blank here should be consistent with her being out of step. It's not in any way sure that it's going to be a synonym, but it's going to be consistent with out of step. And even that that even amplifies the negative nature of blank 2. Well, to emulate something is to copy it. That would be a positive thing. So it's not that. And to be appreciated by, that's just the normal usage that we're used to. That would be a positive. That's not what we want. So alienated from. It has to be alienated. We're sure about that. Okay. So we know F goes in the second one. Let's clean that back up. Noble, but. So whatever follows is going to be inconsistent with noble. Noble but accepted. That wouldn't make sense. Accepted would not be in contrast to noble. Something could definitely be noble and accepted. In fact, we would expect something noble to be accepted by the general public. So actually, B is going to be the first thing we rule out. The key to this question, when you look at so many different questions, I want you to sort of think of them sometimes in terms of physical space or distance between two objects or two ideas or two people or whatever it may be, and sometimes separated by time. That's something they try to do over and over, also in the math questions, which is something you may see. Do we have anything here already? That means kind of a change in verb tenses. Do we have anything in the first column that's related to time? Yes. Anachronistic. Okay, I think we have Greek and Latin mixed up here in this one. Chronos, again, I described last week if you were here. Chronos, meaning the Greek, he's the Greek, right? The Greek god of time. And so Chronos, meaning in some way related to time. Again, an expensive Rolex watch is a chronograph. A timeline of something is a chronology. Anachronistic means in some way not in keeping with time, not correctly in time. So as a noun, an anachronism is something that doesn't fit in that time frame. For instance, if you watch a movie Western, and then in the background you can see the jet trails of a plane flying overhead, that's an anachronism. Or if you see kind of a cheap Western, and you notice the guy in the background's wearing a wristwatch, that's an anachronism. Definitely, if that word is unfamiliar to you, write that down, anachronism. So as an adjective, anachronistic means not out of place in that time. People who write on a typewriter today would be anachronistic. Or someone who drove, a Model T Ford would be an anachronism. And the tip-off why it must be anachronistic is already. That's talking about time. Plus, noble but already exotic, that wouldn't make sense. So we have no choice. It must be anachronistic, and then it must be alienated from. So A and F. Very comparable processes we're going through on these as we did in the earlier questions with sentence equivalency. Now, let's look at 6, which is just